Welcome to The Warehouse. Have you ever heard a sermon and thought, how in the world did he discover that? Or where did he get that idea? Every week at Cornerstone Church, two teams dig into the biblical text that'll be taught during our weekend services. We spend hours talking about the text, the context, the culture of the time, you name it. But you can't stuff all that into a 30-minute message. That's where we come in. We're going to show you the stuff in the warehouse that didn't make it to the stage. Hey, Nathan.
Hey.
You walk up to a truck, and that truck has a stick shift. How are you feeling in this situation?
Interestingly, I feel anxious, but not for the reason that you would think.
Ooh.
So I can drive a stick shift. My wife actually taught me while we were dating.
That's cute.
She drove a little bitty Kia Rio with blue flames on it. Totally not her personality. She bought it from somebody else. It had like Scooby-Doo sticker and like dragon heads on the... And anyway, if you know my wife, that is like not Tia at all.
Where on the spectrum from Scooby to Dragonhead is she?
Scooby.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but she taught me to drive a stick shift in the parking lot of Shawnee Community College.
A good parking lot to learn.
Yep.
Spread out. Not a lot of light poles.
Nope. I didn't hit anything. I didn't grind it too much. But then like, so the reason I would actually be more intimidated is because of the fact that it's a truck.
Because you learned on a smaller.
I learned on
a
small car, and like honestly, I feel like not a man when I say this, but anytime I have to drive a truck, it makes me very nervous. It's like such a big vehicle, and I'm used to driving cars that I just am afraid that I will not.
Yeah.
Anticipate how while I'm backing up or something.
You just have to snort, spit, and get in there.
That's true.
Yeah. So picture it. Sam's, 1994.
Mm-hmm.
Marion Ford and Sam's have a little promotion where they brought some of their inventory over to Sam's. And my grandfather decides he's going to get me a Ford Ranger.
Wow.
Electric red. Stick shift.
Picturing.
I tell him,
what a guy.
My grandparents were too young to be grandparents, even though they retired before I was born. And so Daddy Bob was his name. He wasn't Grandpa. He was Daddy Bob. I said, Daddy Bob, wow, God, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to drive a stick shift. We'll take care of it. Get the truck. I get in shotgun with him. He gets up on the interstate, getting ready to head back down to Cypress. And we're on the interstate. He pulls over on the shoulder of the interstate and says, all right, you're up.
Really?
The interstate.
I learned how to drive a stick shift on the interstate. But made it. Got up. I get off the interstate north of Goreville. Get through Goreville. There's a 4-way stop in West Vienna on Route 37.
Yeah.
And it took me 10 minutes to get back going again. Not a very populated area, but I kill it so much that I'm in the middle of the intersection. And finally, from the east, somebody's coming, and Daddy Bob says, well, it's time to start going. And finally, I got it going. And I've been pretty comfortable behind the wheel of a stick-shifted truck ever since.
Interesting.
Trial by fire.
Yeah.
Wow.
He survived a Japanese prisoner war and camp in World War II and the Bataan Death March. So, it didn't faze him that his grandson could have killed us, not knowing how to drive a stick. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I'm kind of terrified right now for you.
Yeah. But that was 1994.
Yeah,
so.
it was a while ago. I've been driving for a while.
Like
Do you have any trauma from that?
More than likely.
At stop signs?
I do self-medicate with food.
Okay. And it started then.
Okay, well, on to the text.
Speaking of, we're going to head on into Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 to 48. Fun week is what I was going to say. Talking about retaliation and loving your enemies. That's not really fun. What's your big idea from this, Stephanie?
Don't seek revenge, but pursue love to look like God.
Hey, read that again, Stephanie.
Love to look like... I can't read. Don't seek revenge, but pursue love to look like God. That makes way more sense.
There you go.
Like big white beard, big crown to look like God.
Is that what God looks like?
Isn't it?
No.
If Monty Python taught us anything.
No.
Who?
Monty Python? You don't know who Monty Python is?
No, but let's...
It's not a person. Okay.
How about you, Nathan?
My big idea was Jesus followers lay down their rights for others.
Not bad. Not bad. I said Jesus exchanges the eye for an eye for a heart to heart. I didn't get enough fanfare in the room yesterday either. That was pretty good.
Good job, Jay.
Hey, what about any context highlight? Because we're still right here. We're going to be here for a while. Matthew 5, 6, and 7 as we walk through the Sermon on the Mount. What is there something we need to pull out from our context for this piece?
I think the only thing I was reminding us of was we're in this section where Jesus is talking about how he's not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So as we, in case you have missed one of those weeks, we've got this pattern of Jesus saying, you've heard that it was said this, but I say to you. And that just like really closely follows the pattern of him saying, I didn't come to get rid of it, but to fulfill it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest context for me.
Awesome. Anything we need to pick back up? She's shaking her head no. And for this audio platform, it works. Matthew 5, 38 to 48. The confetti is still messing with us a little bit, so please forgive us. Have grace. I'm going to read it. I tell you what, read it all again, and then we just pick up. I kind of liked how we did that. So, 38 to 48, Matthew chapter 5. You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who's evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do you not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect.
Nice.
Retaliation and love your enemies. About, that first section, 38 to 42. Let's give it a whirl.
Bring it.
So Exodus 21 was the first place we hear about giving an eye for an eye. So when we talk about giving an eye for an eye, should we be walking around trying to
Three Stooges?
trying to Three Stooge people? Probably not.
Probably not. Probably not.
Mo was my favorite stooge.
Oh, I've never thought of calling the individual ones a stooge. It makes sense that you have Three Stooges, but a singular stooge.
A singular stooge.
Huh. Interesting. No, that's not what's going on there. This was contextually in a spot where God was through Moses establishing their civil law, right? So this is actually a law around retaliation. There were several other ancient Near East countries that had very similar laws on retaliation. And so this is just basically saying that the punishment has to fit the crime. Yeah. It was setting the outside limits. It wasn't saying that if someone gouges out your eye, you got to go gouge out theirs.
So it wasn't a mandatory eye for an eye.
Right.
It was the idea of, all right, your eye, but no more than your eye.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not getting both eyes.
Right.
Yeah.
Or going to kill their family or something like that because they took your eye.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is a pretty good idea because that's our natural tendency, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's for us to plus one. Then.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Times 10 them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other important thing here is this was not in a section that was talking about their personal conduct, but it was in their civil law. So it's not just
in Exodus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that eye for an eye was not hey, if somebody hurts you, you have the right to go get equal retaliation on them. But it was actually for their governing body. It was setting the standards, setting precedent for how much can you require of a person whenever they bring it to court. You can require equal, but not more than. So it wasn't someone knocks out your tooth, go knock out theirs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. You're having a dispute with your neighbor about the fence you just put up.
Yeah.
Don't just go to blows.
Yeah. So I think that's important. It's establishing you cannot go further than this, and specifically not just that you personally cannot go further than this, but like in a civil lawsuit, you can't go further than this.
Very cool.
That was it for that part for me.
Yeah.
So then it
we've
goes
got,
on.
We've got 2 great idioms coming up that have lasted through generations from this section. And the first one is in verse 39, turning the other cheek.
Yeah. So again, we have that pattern of you've heard that it was said, and this one was from the Bible, like it was from Exodus, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And then he says, but I say to you. So he's elaborating on and getting to the heart of it and like really, up in the ante for them. So what's going on in that next part? Like, do not resist one who is evil, but if someone slaps you on the right, turn to him the other also.
Right. Don't resist. Is that a thing where we talk about just going limp and letting them do whatever?
Yeah, one of the commentators I read on this said like the do not resist was more saying like don't seek revenge instead of like it's not saying to lay there and allow stuff to happen to you or be an abuse.
So fitting in with retaliation.
Right.
Don't rise up.
Right.
Don't.
Yeah.
So what do you think? So if that's the case, like he does tell them if they get slapped to turn the other cheek.
Right. Yeah. The very next sentence in our Bible is if anyone slaps you on the right, let them have the left.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was culturally understood as like a deep insult to be slapped on the face. Right. And some commentators I read said like it was like slapping them on the backside of their hand with their right.
Nope.
No.
Not slapping them on the backside. It's like giving them a backhand in the face.
But I'm hitting the back with my hand. I'm so sorry.
That's twice in a row.
It's fine.
Yes.
Are we going to have to like issue a different rating for this podcast?
Yeah.
Because of me.
Backsides keep coming up.
Because of how I keep saying words.
Yes.
Words
you
are
slap them
hard.
in the face cheek with the back of your hand. Yes.
Yes. Oh.
If anyone slaps you on the right face cheek, turn to him the other also.
Yeah. Okay.
And back to Exodus, they talked about, so in Illinois, here in Illinois, we would call that battery, right? He's hitting someone, touching someone that doesn't want to be slapped in the face cheek is battery. And so even there in Exodus 21, it talks about what to do. So if you were to strike your father or your mother, death was the penalty. And so it's really interesting that fulfilling the law here means turning the other cheek. It's really interesting to me that Jesus fulfills it in such a way that it really sounds like it's flipping it on its head.
I really like how you put face, cheek there.
Yeah, we're going to have to do some overcorrection for a while.
Yeah. Make sure nothing can be taken that way. Yeah, and something that I hadn't really paid attention to until this study time is like some of these. So in a lot of these, Jesus is using hyperbole. Yeah. I had never read these as potentially hyperbole as well, but he might not be like, I don't know that he's talking about literally someone slaps you. So literally just say, hey, you want to slap me on the other side of the face. And again, we see that especially in this next part, if someone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well.
Yeah.
Again, like that. So the context there was that the middle class or the working class typically had two garments. There was the tunic that was the closest to their skin, and there was the cloak that was on the outside. And so someone would sue you to take your tunic. I think, Stephanie, you brought up something interesting with that in particular.
Yeah, that they couldn't do that. Like in Moses'
legally, they
law,
didn't have the right to sue someone for their tunic, right?
Right, because then they would be left with no clothing, and then they would have nothing to keep them warm at night.
Yeah. So
that tunic being the closest piece of clothing to you. Mm-hmm. So it's your
protection.
Picturing it. Yeah, I mean, we all know what the picture is, but it's your shirt that's longer than a shirt that men wore, and then the cloak would be their jacket, their coat.
Yeah.
And so suing for a tunic was against the law of Moses? Is what you said?
Yeah, it was in Exodus 22:26 and Deuteronomy 24:13.
Do you have that pulled up where you can read it?
Did.
Okay, you can get back to it in a second.
Yeah, go ahead and.
So that's really interesting. So this thing that was against the law, but Jesus saying, if anyone would sue you for that part, also give him your outer garment as well. Give him your, he sues for your shirt, give him your jacket too.
So if this literally happened, then they would have been standing there naked before the court. So it's like, it seems very unlikely that he's talking about it literally doing that. So I wonder like whether he's talking about a literal slap on the cheek and turning it, or if it's more like the principle here.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that like, you know, if there was that if the situation presented itself, you know, to be slapped twice, that it wouldn't apply there. But I wonder if he's more going for the hyperbole of saying like, hey, even in this case where someone is giving you like the worst insult, you'd be willing to just take it and then go +1 on like the graciousness factor.
Yeah. And especially today, there is that cultural thing of it being slapped by someone, of course, but it's not the same. It doesn't carry the same weight culturally as it would have back then of being slapped in the face cheek.
So Exodus 22:26 says, if ever you take your neighbor's cloak and pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. So the whole, he needs it back before he goes to bed type thing, or he will freeze to death. And then Deuteronomy 24:13 says, you shall restore to him the pledge as the sun sets, that he may sleep in his cloak and bless you, and it shall be righteousness for you before the Lord your God.
Did you say cloak in both of those?
That one was cloak. Why did you? Cloak.
Yeah, that doesn't seem. So I wonder. I mean, that's a pledge versus suing you for it, and then a cloak versus a tunic.
Yeah. You said one of the commentators said that it was against the law of Moses to sue for a tunic?
Yep.
You remember which commentator?
No.
Well,
Yeah.
anyway, it's a bad situation.
It's a bad situation, and so like Jesus is at least saying. So like what is clear, whether he's talking like hyperbolically or whether he's talking literally, is that they had an expectation. Like the first one is very much geared toward like, how much can I get out of the person who's opposed to me? Like, and he's saying like, how much can I give to this person who's trying to harm me? Which is just a very different upside down way of talking about how we should interact with one another. And that's like the consistent pattern here. So then you go on to, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. And that was, there was a term for that was impressment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Roman centurions, Roman soldiers of the time, had the legal right to demand that any citizen carry their backpack, their load, all their stuff for 1 mile.
Yeah.
And it was something that, like, from what I read, probably was not an everyday occurrence, but they all would have been familiar with it.
Yeah.
So they knew somebody so it's not like it's happening to each of them all the time, but they would have known somebody or they would have seen it happen.
Right. Yeah. And it's really interesting. So a mile is from the Roman phrase mille passus, and my Roman is off, but it's 1,000 paces. So a mile is 1,000 paces. I thought was really interesting. Yeah, just like you said, Roman law showed the ability to force a civilian to carry their pack. And that idea is outlandish to me. These trained soldiers coming up to this, 60-year-old farmer and saying, all right, here's my stuff. Let's go a mile. So much so. And also it was against Roman law to make them go any further, which is really interesting when you see it, when you try to picture this scenario. And so many citizens would drive stakes on the ground a mile from their homes as the marker. And so if they were forced into this situation, they knew where they had to go, and they would go drop the stuff and be done with it.
We're going back to the cloak.
Okay.
So the cloak was the thing that they were not allowed to take from them. It was not the tunic.
Okay.
So the cloak would have been the big deal.
So
not the tunic.
Okay. So
sorry, going all the way back, but I've been over here looking it up. I'm like, no. I know this made sense yesterday, so why can't I figure it out today? But it was the the garment that was recognized by Jewish law to be a possession that could not be taken away, and that was the cloak, because that was what kept them warm at night.
Okay, and that would have been a thicker, but a thicker outer garment than the tunic. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and so Jesus was saying, if they sue for that, give them the thing that they're not supposed to sue for too.
Right.
Powerful.
Yeah.
So in impressment, it goes off into. I read some stuff about the British Navy engaging in impressment and forcing people to be sailors on their ships. It's really interesting. Up until I'm trying to think if it was the 17 or 1800s that they still impressed civilians to join their ranks.
What's the
so like
there's
being drafted, but like
what was the quartering? Like there's something. I'm sorry, I don't remember my history.
Yep.
There, so there's a constitutional amendment, quartering of troops amendment,
right?
3 in 1791 that forbids the housing of any military service member in private homes without the consent of the owner. Because prior to that, they could just forcefully take up residence.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Anyway, it's just interesting.
Yeah. Very, very similar. And so then we get the phrase "go the extra mile" from Jesus saying, "These people who have conquered our land and are now ruling it with an iron fist, if they make you do this thing, you could be going on a family outing, you got your wife and your kids, and the soldier comes and says, 'Go this mile with me,' and so you have to ruin." At least how long ever it takes to get you a mile down the road. And Jesus is saying, now go 2. And then the picture, knowing that for this Roman soldier, it's illegal for him to make you go any further. And now Jesus is saying to his disciples and those that were listening, you forcefully go another to show him that. That was just, it would have been unthinkable.
Yeah. These are like outrageous shows of generosity toward people who like intend you harm.
Yeah.
Right. Like this would have stood out like a sore thumb. If people behaved like this, it would have been very noticeable.
Yeah. They would have stuck out like sore thumbs. Anything else for that section for retaliation up until there?
Yeah, I just think like just kind of putting a bow on that section, like if I had to summarize it, and I'd welcome your summaries as well, but like to me, it seems like our human nature is to ask like, how much can I do to get back at that person? And I see it like in my kids, I see it like in adults, I feel it of like, okay, how far can I go before it's too far of getting back at them? It's like, if the law of Moses established like, you can't do more than what they did to you, it's like, okay, then I'm going to do every bit of what they did to me.
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to make sure that they suffer equally. And Jesus instead is saying, like to go the exact opposite way.
Yeah.
To think of like how much can I show them love and grace and generosity and like be self-sacrificing rather than self-serving in this.
One of the note that I have for this summary for this passage was do more than the minimal, go beyond human inclination, go beyond natural response. If they strike you on the cheek, let them do it. And then some, turn the other cheek. If they ask something from you, give it. And then some, forgive, give, love, do more than expected.
Yeah.
And then Morgan, he said the law was written so you wouldn't retaliate +1. But now Jesus is saying you need to give +1. I thought that was good.
Yeah. So, and just like vamping on that a little bit. I mean, if you've got, so you could have where someone slaps you and you just, so the natural inclination and like what would be justifiable in just retaliation would be you slap them back.
Right.
Jesus is saying, don't slap them back. He not only says like, just take it, but like give them the other cheek.
Yeah.
So, and same thing, it's like not only don't refuse the soldier who tells you to carry his pack, not only carry it the 1 mile that you're required to, but instead go 2 miles. It's just like,
I'm even thinking of Facebook posts. You've posted something on your congressman's Facebook page, and somebody has yelled at you for what you said, and you go and type your all caps for them. And even those minutes, those moments of, you don't really feel victimized, but you really want to retaliate things. Even in those moments, it's, don't do that. Do exactly the opposite of what you want to do.
And don't you just think of like Jesus being crucified and saying, Father, forgive them for they don't know what they do. It's like he could have had every right to like call in angels, call in strike force and take out and like have him, get down off the cross and take them all out. And it would have been just.
Yeah.
They were doing like the most unjust thing ever in the history of humanity and killing the Son of God.
Well, when you're talking about that makes me think of verse 44, pray for those who persecute you. So like as Jesus was being persecuted, he was still saying like, Lord, for they do not know what they are doing, So that I see Jesus in all, which we should in the Bible, but like so far in the Sermon on the Mount, it's just like, man, he's fulfilling all of this. And it's really cool.
Yeah, he wasn't a do as I say, not as I do kind of guy.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you shall love your neighbor. First shows up, I think, Leviticus 19. You shall not take, verse 18, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So that's straight from the Bible, but then he adds on a little extra biblical part of hating your enemy.
Yeah. So the hate your enemy part, this is the first time so far in the Sermon on the Mount where he's not quoting something straight from scripture. So hate your enemy is not in the Bible, but theory had it that it was a Jewish idiom. That culture at that time was teaching something like this. And so he was trying to teach them like, this is what you're hearing, but I say to you is completely different.
So they would have heard it, but sure not from the Torah.
Right.
And I wonder if it's kind of like a reading between the lines of the Torah, or so it says. The Torah says to love your neighbor as yourself, but if it like in the absence of it, like putting something about your enemies, like a natural human extension of that would be love your neighbors, but hate your enemies.
But I think isn't it I'm going to it now, so like. But in Leviticus, he even talks about how you're supposed to be loving your enemies. I'm going. Hold on. Okay. I'll read it.
That's cool.
As she goes, here's Parker putting back in the dance mix of our waiting.
Okay, no, you guys do something else. Don't keep doing this. Please keep reading. Okay, no, actually, I found it.
What?
But in verse 17, it says, you shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest in your incur sin because of him, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So it's not saying not to hate your enemy, but it does say you shall not hate your brother, which I guess would be different because of never mind.
Yep.
Culture.
So still
them
the
could have
vein.
added it. My bad.
It's cool.
No, that's good.
Scriptures.
Good color.
Yeah.
Good color.
Yeah.
Oh.
Adding some
Shading
nuance.
Yeah, good shade.
Working with colored pencils here instead of just markers.
Yeah, exactly.
Which you can do some cross hatching and stuff with markers.
I've never cross-hatched.
Okay.
But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. You brought that up. That just again, it's still revolutionary to us, even though we know the words. We don't do it, right? Who of us loves that guy who cuts us off on the interstate, or goes before it was his turn at the four-way stop, or pulls out in front of us and then turns left 50 yards down the road.
You've got some road rage stuff going on.
I know. Yeah.
These are all driving
Do you struggle
examples.
with people with driving?
Yes, I struggle with people.
Driving.
Period. Oh, driving. I'm a recovering road rager. I haven't exploded in years, but yeah, I still like.
Nathan,
who is this guy?
Don't drive in front of him.
What are you saying?
you're a complete stop at a stop sign guy and a
stay at the speed limit. Yeah.
speed limit driver.
Yeah, you would drive Jay insane.
No,
back to the text, though. Hate your enemy. So the other part in verse 43 where it says hate your enemy, and then in verse 44 it says enemies. So just the singular to plural part. So it's covering all bases.
Sure.
Sure. No. Okay.
Whether you've got one or tons of enemies.
Yeah.
I mean,
Parker's got quite a lot of enemies.
That's
not true.
That's uncalled for. Why?
I know. I don't know why he would. I don't know why he would incur that many.
Okay, he says it's true.
It's not true.
You know who you are.
We don't like. And I'm joking.
Persecute.
Wow.
So again, we've talked about persecuting before too. Persecute. It's not just the light standing up against you or disagreeing with something you say. It's not even your government passing a law that you don't like. It's going back to Jesus in the Beatitudes, talking about for his name's sake, right? Is that how you would read persecute here?
I think it could be all of the above. Anyone opposing you, or making your life difficult.
Yeah.
And I think so. This is something I was thinking about some over the past couple of weeks, like in one of my biblical hermeneutics class for seminary. Like
you like saying hermeneutics.
I kind of do.
Yeah, it's a good word.
So hermeneutics is the theory of interpretation. And one of the things that we've talked about is like the importance of not reading. I'm going to use another big word here, guys. I'm not just trying to, but like not reading anachronistically. So not reading things that were not like happening in that period into that period. You mentioned like
road rage.
Yeah. So road rage, driving a stick shift. And I think, Jay, you're just stretching it a little bit to talk about road rage in Jesus' day.
I'm telling you.
No, I was going to say
Peter, if anybody would have, Peter would have had some road rage.
No, I was just going to say, like, I see persecution, and something that I've said probably on the air on this podcast is like, and just think it's Nero, like burning people at the stake and everything. But that was not happening right now.
Yeah.
Now this would be like, this message was still applied to the church whenever that was happening. But also, like, we have to be careful even whenever we read like some of the commands to, that authorities, governments are generally, a good thing and put into place by God to govern the people and to protect the good and punish evil and that kind of stuff. It's like that was still written before you have Emperor Domitian. And so anyway, just being careful, like, to talk about what kind of persecution was happening right here. It was not the widespread brutal murdering of Jews or Christians. It was more going to be like the
making you go a mile.
Yeah.
When you didn't want to go a mile.
Yeah. And like, I mean, there was harsh taxation and stuff on them. And I'm not saying that it wasn't hard for the Jews at that time and stuff, but we shouldn't read back into it the like brutal persecution that happens later.
Yeah. He's not saying for those who are going to persecute you 11 big time. That's a good point. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
So we can't look. I just lost the word.
Anachronistically.
I lost that second syllable.
Anachronistically.
I'm glad I'm not trying to say this right now.
Yeah.
Anachronistically. Taking stuff from the future and putting it into the past.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's verse 44. What do you have coming up next?
Go ahead.
So I was just going to say with verse 45, we just see the love of God here for all. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good and sends rain to the just and the unjust. So just how this is in a positive light and not a negative light.
Which is something that, like, honestly, like I think I misinterpreted for a long time. Because like I thought of like rain.
This passage or what she was saying?
Specifically this passage, the sins rain on the just and the unjust. I took the sunshine as a positive and the rain as a negative. And I think that's because of like, we just typically, sad scenes in movies, there's always rain. And but that would not have been the case for them because rain was like a blessing from the gods.
Right,
it would
yeah.
almost be a reverse. Like too much sun in that day kills everything.
But like
Right.
in an agrarian culture and stuff, like they need both the sun and the rain for crops to grow. So both of these are positive. And he's saying that like God gives good blessings to both like the people who are like his friends and the people who are his enemies.
Which we talked about that yesterday, which was
Yeah, common grace.
it's
Is that
common
what you're
grace.
looking for?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. What are examples of common grace?
Examples, not the definition, Stephanie. What's an example
No,
of common grace?
I'll talk for a second and then you can word.
Okay,
after that.
thank you.
Okay.
I have no brain right now. You were singing it earlier.
Whoa, I was singing If I Only Had a Brain earlier.
See?
That's the soundbite.
Whoa.
I have no brain.
No sound bites.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, so what is the doctrine of common grace?
Common grace is just the fact that God, because he is rich in mercy and kind to his creation, like bestows grace on all humans, regardless of whether they are like in Christ or not. And this is like, so the fact that we like God could justly wipe us off the planet, like kill each and every one of us, because he made a covenant with us that like, as long as we do what's right, that we'll have life. And whenever we sin, that we receive death. And so the moment any of us sins, he could rightly wipe us off the face of the earth, but he doesn't. And he's patient because he wants people to come to salvation. And so we experience like life. We experience like not only just life, like time on this earth, but we experience good things in life.
That's what I was thinking too. So not only are we not getting wiped out when we should have, but even to the point where Rachel and I had our 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
And we just
Congrats,
went out.
man.
Thanks, man. We congratulate her. She persevered. But we just went out and had some crab legs at Red Lobster. So even crab legs and the crack and pulling out the meat perfectly in one thing.
Dipping
and
it in butter.
Dipping it in that butter.
Yeah.
That's common grace, man.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And like you look at, I mean, just medical advances and stuff. It's like you have people who are not like some Christians and non-Christians both working alike for the good of all humanity. That's evidence of common grace that like the world in general, like the lifespans are getting longer and those kinds of things. That's common grace. Undeserved, totally undeserved.
Yeah.
God does not owe us any of that, but he gives it to us because he's kind. And then that's usually, did you want to offer any?
Yeah, what's an example?
And I think another one would be like the fact that we can look at even sometimes there are couples who are not believers who end up with like, who actually have good marriages over the like long-standing marriages where they love and care for one another. And that's an evidence of common grace. The fact that people get to enjoy friendship and laughter and kids. And that
Very cool.
It's usually contrasted with special grace or saving grace or specific grace. Those are some different names that refer to like specifically the grace that we encounter whenever we place our faith in Jesus, the gift of salvation and eternal life.
Awesome. And this kind of sticks a fork in the idea of karma as well. Man, so even Christians I hear talking about well, they're going to get theirs and talking about karma, and just that is not something we think is a thing.
Yeah.
All 46 through 48. What you got?
So the 46, if you love those who love you, that is something that comes easy for us. And it's natural, where loving those who are harder to love may take more of God, like for us to accomplish that.
Yeah, that's kind of supernatural.
Yeah, kind of supernatural there.
Yeah, I found it really interesting that Jesus uses he calls on tax collectors in this as an example of people who don't love well, even they do this. In Matthew's gospel, who is the tax collector disciple.
Do you think it hurt a little bit to write that line down? Right. He's like, come on, Jesus.
Right. And if the timeline of the Sermon on the Mount and Matthew's call are how it's written, Matthew's call is after the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
And so So tell me about the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
Oh, he said tax collect. Yeah.
Yeah, that's about right.
But and even later, Jesus being accused of being a friend of tax collectors and sinners was just a pretty amazing juxtaposition there.
Another good word. It's been a while.
Since we used juxtaposition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good word.
I had to make up from not being able to get that word that I missed. All right. What else?
So in 45, we've got this connective, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. And I think it's important that we keep in mind that like the Sermon on the Mount is not like, how do we experience salvation? Like, how do we get into the kingdom? But it's like, how do the citizens of the kingdom behave? So when he's saying this, it's not like, hey, if you want to be a son of the Father, then you need to make sure to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And if you do that, then you'll be adopted into the family of God.
Right.
But it's more along the lines of like, if your identity really is as a son or daughter of God, then you will you will love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you.
Yeah.
This is the way we behave in our family.
This is the proof that you do have this life.
Yeah.
And not this is how you get it.
Yeah.
That's great. Anything else?
For the whole text?
Yeah.
Just 48. You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. A lot of people take this out of context a lot without adding the rest of the passages or the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. And whenever you take that out and you just have it by itself, it can be really confusing.
How so?
It just leans toward perfectionism.
Yes. And that's not at all what he's saying here. He's not calling us to be perfect. Like, he is calling us to grow within our relationship and grow as followers of Jesus, and how he is the perfection, not us.
How do you know that? Because he says, you therefore must be perfect.
We must be perfect as he is perfect. How do we get there?
Jesus.
That works for me.
I'm like,
Yeah.
guys. And then
Go ahead.
I was just also going to say perfect here has a lot of different meanings, that it could have meant complete, full in development, to grow and mature. And so whenever we look at it through the lens of what it possibly could have meant, like, we always just, the perfection part or complete, those still seem really scary to us. But there's also the growing and maturing into being like God. So I kind of wanted to hear your thought on that contextually. What do you think that meaning is?
I think the shock and awe factor of you. What do you mean? I have to be perfect in the same way that God is perfect?
Like Yahweh is perfect is what you're telling me I have to be?
I think that's what Jesus is going for. So I don't think he's trying to give them something. So I don't think they would have heard it and said like, oh, as long as I'm growing and maturing or whatever, I'm all right. I think they would have heard along with, in the same way as he's saying, you've heard it said, adultery is the bad deal, but what's actually like, if you lust after a woman and every guy there's like, not making eye contact and stuff. And here he's saying like, hey, don't resist those who are evil and love your neighbors and pray for those who persecute you. Yeah. And I think across the board, what's happening here is that there should be a weightiness to this, that people instead are saying like, goodness gracious.
Yeah, it's
man, I thought I just was starting to get in line with what the rabbis were teaching. I've lived my whole life trying to get within these parameters, and I'm getting close to like the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. Like, and Jesus is saying, nope, scribes and Pharisees isn't good enough. It has to exceed that. Your perfection has to be the same as God's.
Yeah. It's been a crescendo for the entire time on the Mount so far, and and this seems like the apex. You have to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect.
Well, and this is ending the "for you have said," but this is so this is the ending of that whole entire teaching, because the next teaching we go into is giving to the needy. So just the way he's kind of ending this.
So that's an exclamation point that is just hard to recover from.
Yeah. So it really leaves you like reeling, head spinning, saying like, no way.
Yeah.
And I think that's his intent, because it leaves us like perfectly primed for the gospel, because Jesus is the one who is perfect in the same way that the Father is perfect.
And so the perfect other end of the couplet of that is Jesus in Matthew 11 saying, "Come to me."
Yep. And I'll give you rest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, I mean, and this is just diving off into a theological topic, but this would be imputation, right? Is where we go with this. Imputation is, so one side of it is that like our sin is placed on Jesus and like Jesus becomes sin for us. And the other side of it, this is the double imputation, is that not only that, but we receive the perfect righteousness of Christ, where God views us as like every bit as righteous as Jesus.
Which is the harder part for us to wrap our heads around and accept.
For me, it's the second. Like that God views me as perfectly righteous. It's like, I think it's really common for us to latch on to like, hey, God, please forgive me for my sins. Thank you. I know that Jesus died for me. But then like next time I sin, I'm like, oh gosh, okay, God, I'm sorry. Please forgive me for my sins. Thank you that Jesus died for me. But to understand the full credit of righteousness, that's not based on my behavior at all.
Yeah. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Man. So we have to be perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect. And it only happens through Jesus, the Christ.
So I'm going to throw on
Please.
a whole different thing, not different, but in line with this. But Luke 6 says, be merciful as your Father is merciful. So would you say that they're still teaching the same thing? Like, because that's the Sermon on the Mount, but Sermon on the Plain, like the...
Right. So you could...
Just to kind of push up, ask a different question.
I mean, different, but still impossible.
Yeah. So, I mean, the part of the question there is, are they reporting on the same message? Right? Is that, so are these truly parallels? Are these talking about the same sermon, like same instance of the sermon? Or is this, Jesus is an itinerant preacher traveling around. And so he gave this message of the kingdom multiple times. And one time he talks about, he uses the word perfect. Another time he uses the word merciful. And either way is an acceptable interpretation. Most people I've read think that it's two different instances of a similar message.
Right.
Rather than like, I think some people try to jump through the hoops and make it the same, because you could say that like the Mount of Beatitudes overlooks a plain and stuff. So maybe
A nice plain.
Yeah. So they have like in Luke 6, the Beatitudes, Jesus pronounces woes, that part. So love your enemies.
Yeah. It would be a bit lacking of us to say that Jesus only preached the Sermon on the Mount once.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So I tend to think that Luke, the Sermon on the Plain, is a different account, and Jesus places different emphasis because of who he's talking to.
Cool.
And Luke records it differently because of who he's writing for. Yeah.
He didn't have a podcast.
He didn't.
He didn't?
He did not.
Wow.
We do, though. What are you guys excited to hear this weekend? Naltan?
What'd you say?
Call back. He doesn't cross his T's in the right places all the time.
Oh.
What a great memory. I'm going to add in one thing, and then this ties to like what I'm excited about. So verse 44, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So just practically in counseling environments, this is like one of the first things whenever someone's struggling with someone who's hurt them, which often is like what happens whenever someone's walking into a counseling room. This is often one of the first things that I encourage them to do. It's like one of the first steps in being able to forgive someone is praying for them.
Yeah.
Like, can you genuinely desire their good rather than their harm? Can you like ask that God would bless them? Ask that they would have like good things in life and that they would experience forgiveness of God. And so I think like for those of us who are struggling, who do feel like we have enemies and who have felt persecuted, I think that's huge, is to start by praying for those who have persecuted us. So that ties into what I'm excited about, which is, man, again, if we as citizens of the kingdom, as sons and daughters of the Father, lived like this and extended like we were more willing to be taken advantage of than to hurt someone.
Yeah.
or to try to get retaliation, like we were less about our own interest and cared a lot more about the people that we were interacting with, I think it would change things.
Yeah.
Oh man.
I agree.
How about you?
Ditto.
Stephanie?
Ditto.
Yeah. I almost wish that Nick's message from a couple weeks back was right here back to back with this one, because they piggyback off of each other so well, talking about anger, and now this week about retaliation and loving our enemies, how and Nick pressing us about if Cornerstone was that kind of a church who refused to give ourselves to anger, and even into this week, if we were a church who refused to retaliate, even if it was emotionally, if we made ourselves people who prayed for our enemies, what kind of ripples that would go into the region as well.
Totally agree.
Man. That's good.
Yeah.
I'm good.
We do it.
Thanks.
Is TiVo behind the other door, ready to
I sure hope
scare us
not.
to death?
My heart can't take it.
Yeah, guys, 3,500 downloads. Thank you.
Yay,
Good job.
Thank you.
Look at you.
We sure appreciate it, especially you guys that are listening 10, 12, 14 times. I mean, it's working.
We appreciate it.
Thanks, Greg.
That's right.
That's
But hey,
awesome.
thanks. As always, you guys have questions, comments, concerns, critiques, let us know. warehouse@cornerstone.team. And if you'd like to make something explode in our ears without us knowing it, hey,
Please don't.
to Nathan and Stephanie.
No.
But man, thanks. We'll see you on the flip side.
Flippity
Until then,
flop.
Stephanie.
The warehouse is closed.